what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be ranking all 80 brawlers in the game right now, from the very worst all the way up to the very best, for ranked masters only. So I believe this is without modifiers as well, because I think they're completely removed from masters now. I've been pretty much consistently top 50 in masters literally since ranked has been released, so I know what I'm doing. I've been playing a ton of ranked and I watch a ton of competitive as well. So let's dive into it then. So starting with the F tier, these are brawlers which are pretty much useless. They probably have some use cases in some other modifiers, but again, this is masters level ranked. So let's just jump into it. So the first brawler is Doug. Do I even need to speak about Doug? He's just absolutely useless. The only time he can even be somewhat relevant is maybe dueling beetles with a poker and a grey, but that's about it. You'd rather just go a different brawler. Next up we have Chester. So again, he's just way too inconsistent. There's so many brawlers with hypercharges down the lane, and Chester just doesn't have one right now. Janet is next. So again, there are some rare use cases for her, but there's just way better options out there. She has no DPS and there's just nothing you can do. Next we have Frank. So I actually have a few use cases for Frank. I pretty much have a 90% win rate with Frank in ranked, but unfortunately he is countered by too many brawlers. He's just so easy just to shut down, especially with pretty much every brawler in the game. Next up we have Daryl. So again, another brawler that just absolutely sucks. There's basically no use case for him. The only way you can actually use him is probably in quickfire heist below masters, but everywhere else he just absolutely sucks. Next up we have Hank. So Hank is actually pretty decent against squishier brawlers as a late pick, but there's only a few maps like XL, for example, where he's actually really strong. Other than that, he's pretty easy to counter. And then finally we have Maisie. So I don't want to hear it from any of you Maisie mains. She's just plain damn right terrible. Now you can't cycle through supers. She's so easy to counter. She's had a 0 pick rate over 2 months in monthly finals, so she's just absolutely trash. You just gotta face it. Now moving on to the D tiers. So these are going to be your brawlers which sometimes have a rare use case, normally as a late pick or maybe like one map in ranked. Most of the time they just plain and simple suck. So the first one we're going to be going over is Penny. So Penny, she's like okay in a few maps, maybe like as a late pick in Ring of Fire, maybe as a late pick in some bounty maps, but again, it's just so easy to counter Penny. She has no DPS. Next up we have Tara. So there are again a couple of maps where she's okay on, like double swoosh, but again, there's just so many meta brawlers that counter her down the lane, like Amber, like Nita, Sandy. There's just so many brawlers that counter her. Next up we have Squeak. Again, he doesn't have the DPS to keep up with the meta. Ever since they nerfed the residue gadget, he's just been getting ran all over. Even on dueling beetles, he just can't keep up with the hype charge meta. Next up we have El Primo. So I thought that he would be a decent counter pick to some of the other meta tanks in the game, but his DPS is just terrible. His hyper charge is terrible. He's only really useful maybe in Brawl Ball, but then again, I'd rather just go something else. Next up we have Mr. P. So Mr. P can sometimes be a useful counter against some snipers, but again, even with his recent buff, he just gets overwhelmed so easily, and there's just so many aggressive brawlers that counter Mr. P right now. Next up we have Mortis. So Mortis is a good late pick, good counter pick, but again, even some brawlers that you'd think Mortis should counter, they can end up winning the interaction because they might have a hypercharge, or it just takes them too long to build up his super for the majority of the game, whilst you have other assassins in the game that are just way more brainless, like Melody, for example. So why do you really need to go Mortis in this meta? Next up we have Lou. So he's completely lost his place in the meta. Sometimes because there's so many tanks, he might actually want to go a Lou if, for example, Shelly's banned or Charlie's banned, but that's some really rare use cases. And again, inside of Hot Zone, it takes him far too long to get a super. There's just other brawlers with way faster charging supers which can just dominate the game mode, like Sandy, for example. Next up we have Bull. So again, in heist, he's only really got one good heist map, and that is Pit Stop, and there's just better brawlers in heist right now. For example, just Nita with a hypercharge is just absolute destroying the meta. You got Cordelius that counters it, and there's just way better options in the meta right now, but at least he's okay in heist. Next up we have Bo. So I forgot that Bo even exists. Even the bad randoms don't even play Bo. That's how bad he is in the meta. I will say there's a few underrated use cases for him. Maybe people are underrating him, I don't know, but for now he's definitely belonging in the D tier. Next up we have Bonnie. So again, your Bonnie mains, you just gotta face the fact that Bonnie is absolutely terrible, even since the buff to her supercharge rate. There's maybe a few use cases for her, but again, like, she used to always be really strong in heist, but the second you use your super, you're just a sitting duck. even if you get the kill, you're going to get traded out every single time pretty much. So there's just better brawlers that have hyper charges that can just deal way more consistent damage. So Bonnie is just not needed in this meta. Next up we have Barley. So I was actually starting to like Barley a lot since the buff, and the map pool as well last season was really good for Barley, like easily C tier, maybe even B tier. But right now the map pool absolutely sucks for him right now. There's not really many reasons to use Barley in the meta. Maybe New Horizons, that's probably about it. Maybe Pinball Dreams as well. And then lastly we have Ash. So again, I will say that he might be a little bit underrated, but I just think he's far too outclassed. There's so many meta brawlers like Surge, for example, Nita, that just destroy Ash. Now we're going to be moving on to the C tier. So these are brawlers typically that are okay in a few different game modes. They might be really strong in one in particular, or there's just a couple of scenarios you might play them. So the first one is going to be Grom. So I actually want to put Grom in the D tier, but I know a lot of people have a soft spot for Grom because he's really good against bad players that don't know how to juke his shots. But all you have to do is open your eyes and you can juke it at max range. He's like okay in knockout, okay in bounty. He might be okay as a late pick, but again, there's just better late pick options than him right now in the meta. Even Sprout and Ice, for example, has overtaken Grom as that kind of late pick thrower. Next up we have Mandy. So again, there's just far too much aggression in this meta. You got the likes of Max who are just running down Mandy in knockout and bounty. You've got Meg as well who's came into the meta. You've got Buster in those game modes, and Mandy can't really keep up with it. Sometimes she can pop off, but I would say it's only when loads of other snipers abandon the draft where she's able to thrive, maybe in shooting star only. Next up we have Edgar. So again, the map pool has really affected Edgar. There's only really a few maps where he's okay. I've got a good win rate with him in ranked so far. He's really strong in pit stop, like the best brawler in pit stop. There's a few other maps as well, like Split, etc, etc. But again, I just feel like other brawlers are starting to get a bit better, and especially with the hyper charges countering him a bit too much. Next up we have Lily. So I know Lily's not better than Edgar, and I easily could have put Lily in the D tier, but I know a good Lily can definitely make a good impact on the game. But I still think she's just way too easy to counter. All you gotta do is clump up, and there's nothing that Lily can really do. I think their gadget is just making her that's the only reason why she's usable, and in a 1v1 she has insane damage. Other than that, she's awful. Such a bad brawler. Next up we have Willow. So I actually like Willow. She's always super underrated. There's always a good use case for her in maps like Split, Pit Stop, because you can't get really countered by those aggro brawlers because of her super. But again, the map pool doesn't really favor her too much. Next up we have Sam. So I will say that Sam is actually good in a competitive meta, probably close to the B tier, but I think it takes a lot to make Sam work. You need to be a really good player, but if you are a good Sam, then you can definitely do things in this meta. Next up we have Gus. So I think Gus is pretty forgotten. I think C tier might be a little bit of a stretch, but at the same time, I think if multiple brawlers are banned in knockout bounty snipers, Gus can fill that void. He's pretty decent, does some pretty good plays with his super. Next up we have Tick. So again, another brawler that has completely fell off. Even with the hype charge, I've just not really seen him. Even in knockout and bounty, I just think there's just far too much aggression right now. There's so many brawlers that overwhelm him, and it's just easy to close down a Tick ever since that reload nerf in the past. Next up we have Spike. So he received a damage nerf not too long ago, and that's just completely ruined him in the competitive meta. Again, in quick fire below masters, he's insane. But outside of that, I don't really play Spike too much. I don't even see Spike an awful lot from my ranked teammates in Masters. I mean, I did literally put him in my overrated list, but I just think the use rate has just fallen through the roof for him. So yeah, he's just not the greatest right now. Next up we have Pam. So I think Pam is insanely underrated in my Masters games. My randoms never go Pam, probably because no one has Pam maxed out, but she's really good in hot zone, one of the best hot zone brawlers, and she has some decent use case in a few maps like double swoosh, for example. Next up we have Otis. Again, another brawler that's insanely underrated by just the average player. I would say he's not completely best, but there are some really good maps for him. Again, double swoosh, he's really strong on, especially with his gadget. He can be pretty good in Galaxy Arena and other scenarios. So Vision Gear is really underrated on Otis. Next up we have Dynamite. So he's just so completely overplayed by randoms so much. You can only really go Dynamite as a last pick. He's way too easily countered, even with his hypercharge, but he has got a broken hypercharge and a broken gadget, so that will always bail him out. He's a really good late pick in so many different scenarios, so CT is pretty fair for him. Next up we have Jackie. So many grassy maps on Brawl right now. Galaxy Arena, Retina. You've also got like some really good synergy comps in double swoosh with Gray. You've got dueling Beetles, for example. Again, Gray or Poco paired with Jackie. her hype charge is still busted. Next up, we have Griff. So there's always a few underrated use cases for Griff, especially when you want to open up the map on maps like Duel and Beetles, for example, Split, Pinball Dreams. There's just a few good like counter reasons to go Griff to open up the map against like a Thrower or a Jesse or a Lou, something like that. But way too often he is outclassed, and it's so easy to actually just juke his main attack, so he doesn't actually have the biggest damage output. Next up, we have Gale. So again, another brawler completely underrated by the casuals. I see a lot of Gale even on maps like Kaboom Canyon. I know it's not in the rank rotation, but you get what I mean. Like, he's pretty underrated in a lot of different scenarios, but he's just okay right now. The map pool doesn't favor him too much, but his star power, the one that slows, is really underrated and good at countering those hype charge brawlers. Next up, we have Fang. So if I was being honest, I probably would put Fang in the D tier, but I know a lot of Fang mains be like, oh, you're just bad Fang. I am a bad Fang, but at the same time, I just don't see Fang too often, especially when he's a really popular brawler and I'm not seeing him. He's got to be bad for the casuals as well. He's only really good on like bounty, maybe like as a late pick. There's not really too many opportunities to use him because it takes so long to get his hype charge, and there's just so many brawlers that counter him right now in the meta. So I say it could easily be in the D tier. Next up, we have M. So there are a few use cases for M's, but I just don't think she actually has the damage output as a tank counter to keep up with the game right now. I'd much rather go like a Cordelius, a Shelly, something that counters tanks. That's what you use M's for, right? She gets outranged so easily, and she doesn't even do the countering tanks too well. So I think C tier is pretty fair for her. Next we have Crow. So I think if he wasn't good in heist, it would easily be like a D tier brawler, but because of the hyper charge, you can get like 40% easily on the heist save with the carrying Crow star power. It's pretty busted on heist, but outside of heist, he's just absolutely terrible. So do not go Crow anywhere except for heist. Next up, we have B. So B probably is near the bottom of the C tier. I don't really see too much use case for B. It takes too long to get super. She's too squishy, and she just doesn't have the impact of other snipers, but she's still okay. She's like usable. She's not terrible, but she's not the best. So C tier is fair. And then lastly, we have Brock. So Brock's okay when brawlers like Cole, 8-bit, other damage dealers and heist are taken. He's just okay as that kind of late pick. But other than that, he is countered way too easily, especially in a max meta, and his hype charge just sucks. So C tier is pretty fair. Now we're jumping into the B tier. So these are brawlers which are pretty popular in the meta. They can be really strong in the right hands, but still often there is a better option than them in the meta. So we're going to be starting off with Nani. So Nani recently received a damage nerf, which definitely impacted Nani a lot in the meta. I think she's still pretty consistent in game modes like heist, where she can teleport onto the safe and counter other long range brawlers. She's still okay in knockout and bounty as well, but I will say the sniper meta is a little bit over ever since Max has kind of creeped into the meta with a hyper charge. Next up, we have Ruffs, another brawler which is insanely underrated by the casuals because he's just not fun to play according to them, but at the same time he's a really solid option in so many different places. He's really good at opening up the map, really good at getting a lot of supers because of all of his aggression, and he's just an enabler. He's able to bring a lot of power to his team. Next up, we have Shelly. So again, another brawler that is insanely underrated by the randoms. There's just so many brawlers that people forget about, and Shelly just does the job in ranks right now. You take a look at Brawl. Retina and Galaxy Arena is just tank heaven, and Shelly counters tanks pretty much the best out of everyone. It used to be like Charlie, for example, but Charlie's still pretty good. Cordelius is a good shutdown as well, but people forget about Shelly. It's literally a free goal with her with a super. She's actually underrated in a few other scenarios as well, so you can never really go wrong with Shelly with the clay pigeons broken gadget as well. Next we have Miko. So Miko will be B tier. I'm not going to say it's like some crazy strong brawler. It's mainly because you can pretty much go a last pick Miko everywhere, because he's such a good counter pick brawler. So for that reason, I feel like B tier will always be a pretty solid place for him. Again, he's like really good at countering snipers and knockout and bounty, and he's just pretty solid overall. Next up, we have Chuck. So Chuck is just terrible except for in heist, and that's the reason why I put him in B. He's like broken in heist, so I've got to put him in B. Maybe C tier might be a little bit fair, but he's just the best brawler in heist. I don't need to say anymore. Next up, we have Pearl. So Pearl is insanely underrated. I literally made a video about her yesterday on how underrated she is. She's one of the best counters to some of the cheesy strategies going on. For example, with Kit, she's insane at countering Kit. And I think it's just a brawler I'll never see anyone max out. Maybe because Pearl is pretty boring, but she's insane on knockout, insane on bounty. Good use case for her in a few other scenarios as well, like Hot Zone maybe. So I just think Pearl still does insane damage. She only received the HP nerf. It didn't touch the damage. months ago, and she's not really been seen. Next up we have Gray. So Gray, again, is just a support brawler. He can be pretty underrated in a few scenarios and knockout and bounty. He's got some really cheesy strategies on hot zone, for example on Jordan Beetles, good on split, good on ring of fire. He's just good pretty much in most of the game modes. Next up we have Stu. So I will say he has fallen down to the B tier, but maybe like on a grasp of A tier, mainly because there's just a lot of aggression right now and he can't really keep up with it with his DPS, but he is pretty good on hot zone. He's just okay in like gem grab, Brawl as well, but the Brawl meta has kind of left him behind because there's just so many tanks that can just run through him with Max, Sandy, etc. Next up we have Sprout. So Sprout is an amazing last pick again, and for that reason he has to be B tier. Again, this isn't ladder. He's not the best ladder because he's countered too easily, but in ranked, in draft, you can manipulate it really easily, get a good late pick Sprout, and you can pretty much play him in every single map and scenario. It is a little bit risky in some other places, but he's really good at knockout, bounty. He's a good late pick on maps like Split, for example. He's a good late pick in some high scenarios because his hype charge does a lot of damage. So yeah, Sprout underrated in that case. Next up, in the B tier, we have Meg. So Meg is kind of falling down a little bit, mainly because Piper and Nanny aren't as good, but she's still a pretty consistent pick in knockout, bounty, if you need a gem carrier, or maybe maps like Hard Rock Mine. But again, she's not really that brawler that can absolutely carry like she used to be in a heavy hitter sniper meta. Next up we have Lola. So Lola's just a kind of do it all brawler. She's always in a B tier or C tier. She's just consistent, pretty much forgotten about with randoms, but she's still pretty good in just so many scenarios. She can be a gem carrier, she can be really good on a grassy map with a vision gear, and people just don't really go Lola much. And if you're below masters and have quick fire, then Lola's like the best brawler in quick fire, so there is that. Next up we have Rico. So Rico has a lot of good maps in the meta, and his multiple launcher gadget is just completely broken. He's so good at countering tanks. He's got a few really good maps which just push him up, could even be A tier in the ranked meta because of maps like Split, for example, Hard Rock Mine, and a few other ones where he'll just absolutely carry pit stop as well. So he's just a really good first pick on a few maps, which just easily makes him B tier. Next up we have Poco. So Poco is really good when it comes down to hot zone. His heals are just insane since they got buffed like 3-4 months ago. People underrated it. Now he's starting to become meta. There's just so many cheesy strategies you can go with tanks, and just so much aggression with Draco and just BB Buster. There's just so many tanks right now, and Poco can help them get closer to the opposition. Next up we have Leon. So I would say Leon's actually really good against bad randoms because they just don't have a clue where he is when he's invis. I think Smoke Trails is actually underrated on him in the current meta, I will say that, and he's a good counter still to snipers. It will take him a while to get that first super, but it's all about cycling. He still does insane damage, he's still got an insane hype charge, his gadget's still good, so I think B tier is pretty fair, but the pros know how to counter Leon, so probably in a pro meta might even be C tier, but B tier is pretty fair. Next up we have Eve. So I think Eve is falling off a lot. I could easily put Eve in the C tier as well. I think she has some pretty good maps, but again, I just don't think she has the damage to keep up with the meta. All of these snipers and whatever receiving damage buffs, and Eve's just okay right now. Like, there's a few good maps for her, like Breach Too Far, for example, maybe Out in the Open, but again, I'd just rather go a different brawler than Eve. That's just gonna make a bigger impact. Next up we have Colette. So of course Colette is just really strong in Heist. She's B tier mainly because her hype charge rate got nerfed not too long ago, and even in Heist the good players know how to counter a Colette. I know still damage will win the game, and 25% for a hype charge is just crazy. But you know, maps like Breach to Fall, she's actually not that great, and Pit Stop as well. So she's only really like insane on Safe Zone in the Heist meta. So I think B is pretty fair. She's a good counter pick to tanks as well, so B's pretty good. And next we have Carl. So again, another underrated brawler. There's a lot of them that I'm thinking people are sleeping on, but Carl is such a good late pick into so much on knockout and bounty. And I've seen no one go Carl. There's just so many scenarios for him. He's really good because of the amount of damage you can deal with a damage buff, and of course as the opponents go like a counter, you can just switch gadget to the fire gadget, which just deals so much damage. There's a lot of versatility with Carl in this meta. Next up we have 8-bit. So I'm not seeing too much 8-bit right now, but I will say he's really good in the Heist meta on Bridge Too Far and Safe Zone. He's a really good gem carrier as well, and it's some underrated use case for him on maps like Shooting Star, so I think he's pretty solid in the meta. Next up we have Colt. So Colt is just insane on Heist, pretty much really good on every single heist map. And then there's some use case for him as a counter pick sometimes to open up the map, but other than that, he's not really used too much. Next we have BB. So BB's really good because of the hypercharge. She can just make so many plays with chaining her bubbles and the pressure. She's not a good early pick, which I see my randoms make, but she's more so good later on in the draft because she's still easily countered, but she's actually just good like in a lot of different scenarios, like pit stop and heist, for example. She might be good in dueling beetles. There's just a lot of good places for BB. And then finally in the B tier we have Piper. So Piper is really annoying on ladder because she's got the knockback gadget, but I will say she's easier to counter in ranked right now. B/A tier, I think maybe even low A tier for Piper. Main reason being is because at the top level, I think Piper's easy to counter when you've got the likes of Max in the meta, Jean, Melody, Angelo, all of these other brawlers that can counter Piper, but she's still fairly consistent, good on knockout, good on bounty, good in a few heist maps like Bridge to Far and Safe Zone, but I think the map pool probably hurts her more than in previous metas. Now we're going to be moving on to the A tier. So these are brawlers which pretty much dominate in multiple game modes, multiple scenarios, and they're pretty solid picks throughout the whole draft near enough. So we're going to be starting off with Rosa. So Rosa is just so strong in the meta right now. I don't know what it is. I think the meta around her just must enable her to be a bit better with Max and Sandy, for example, and Poco. But in gem grab, she's really good on double swoosh and harder up mine. You've got Brawl, Galaxy Arena, Retina. You've got cheesy strategies in dueling beetles. Any grassy map, and Rosa will dominate. She's so strong in the meta. Next up, we have Belle. So we'll say Belle has dropped down a little bit. Maybe B tier is a little bit more fair since the hypercharge charge rate nerf. I think brawlers like Byron have kind of overshadowed her a little bit, but she's still fairly consistent across the board. You can pretty much go her everywhere on a long range map. There's so many places for Belle in the meta, so A tier could definitely be good as well. Next up we have Buzz. So Buzz could be in and around the A/B tier, but I think A is fair mainly because his hypercharge is just so good at making plays. You can pretty much play Buzz everywhere if you are a good Buzz player, and again that automatic charging super circle is just so good with the hypercharge. You're just guaranteed to make a lot of plays with Buzz, and a good Buzz player will get so much pressure, and that will literally win you games on its own. Next up we have RT. So RT is really good since the gadget rework. Essentially you can just counter tanks, you can be pretty good against snipers as well, and brawlers like Kit in the meta are just running everywhere, and RT is by far the best counter to that in the draft. So yeah, RT's just been getting a lot better right now. We'll say a few of his best maps like Parallel Plays got removed from rotation, so he could have even been like borderline S tier, but the map pool hurts him a little bit, but he's super strong, especially when paired with so many different meta brawlers like Jean, for example. Next up we have Larry and Laurie. So again, they're just really good with twins. The reason why they're so good in the meta is because they're just good against everything. They're a really good counter pick, but at the same time they're actually just good at just against everything, because they've got the super that can defend themselves, they've got the gadget as well that can heal them up, and just overall they're just super toxic. You just think of the map pool, there's so many scenarios you can go Larry and Laurie. Next up we have Buster. So even since the small 1% damage nerf, he's still been a pretty solid brawler. You think a knockout is really good. Hot zone, so many different scenarios. His gadget is still really strong. I will say like the Brawl meta has probably hurt him a little bit because other tanks will counter him, but a good Buster in ranked will literally carry you because of the way they use his super and your gadget combination. Next up we have Surge. Surge is one of my favorite brawlers in ranked right now completely because he's such a good hard carry. He has a lot of HP now. The HP buffs have been creeping up, and he's a great shutdown to a lot of aggression. So I just love Surge. Any grassy map, you can always go Surge because you can use the speed gear, and you just know there's going to be tanks, so you can get your early levels really easily. But in the A tier, we have Jessie. So Jessie with a hypercharge is still really strong. She just cycles it so quickly. 10k HP turret. What's not to love about that? She's really good in hot zone, pretty good in heist in some scenarios. I will say her best heist maps have been removed, but still pretty good. Good at countering tanks in Brawl overall. You can't really go wrong with Jessie and double swoosh as well. Next up we have Amber. So again, pretty much borderline S tier. I would probably put Amber in the S tier, but A tier is pretty fine as well. She's really good in gem grab, really good in hot zone, really good in heist, pretty good in Brawlers, which is just good across the board. I'd even say S tier for sure, bottom of the S tier. But again, there's just so many different ways you can play Amber with the gadget. She deals so much damage, and it's not much that really counters her in the meta. Next up in the A tier, we have Nita. So we'll say her hypercharge is just so crazy strong because she cycles it so quickly. Only 2 supers to get a hypercharge boost bear that has 10k HP. But I will say that I'm having I'm not having much trouble countering Nita with its map pool because, I don't know, it's not really a ton of great Nita maps. Maybe Galaxy Arena and Retina are really good. Pit Stop's really good for her. And maybe a few other scenarios on Double Swoosh. But I will say, if you've got brain cells, you can pinch Nita pretty easily and stop her from getting super. But if your randoms just feed Bruce Bears, it's just over. So it depends on your level of randoms. S tier with bad randoms, and in normal, you know, proper good lobbies, A tier is pretty fine. And then lastly, we have Kit. So Kit is just a master of cheese right now, probably borderline S tier because of how broken. There's so many strategies in Knockout and Bounty, and maybe because of the synergy with Draco, maybe S tier because that synergy right there is just absolutely dumb broken. Even Kit as a standalone brawler does a lot of damage as well. You've got a gadget that can either heal, or you can go and Viz, catch the opponents by surprise, get a couple of swipes, jump onto your teammate. There's just so many broken strategies with Kit. Broken in Showdown, but this is a ranked tier list. Kit is pretty cheesy and people are hating it. Guys, so now we're jumping into the S tier. So these are literally by far the best brawlers in the game right now. You pretty much want to pick them at near enough every single opportunity. They're just going to just completely destroy the lobby. So we're going to be starting off with Charlie. So I will say I'm having a little bit more joy against Charlie now since this super charge rate nerf. But at the same time, Charlie's got a dumb broken super. Her gadget spiders allows her to counter snipers. She's got some good range even since the range nerf. Hypercharge is still pretty good. She's just good everywhere. And pro players just abuse Charlie because of how versatile she is. It's so hard to counter her. And next up we have Cordelia. So again, he got some slight nerfs with the last set balance changes, but that hasn't stopped him from just being so strong. The main reason is because he just shuts down tanks so incredibly hard. Other brawlers are okay at shutting down tanks, but he just locks them in a Shadow Realm and just rips through them, especially with the Hypercharge as well. He's got two good gadgets. It's just a lot to love about Cordelius right now. So in the S tier, we have Jean. So again, for your kind of casual player base, Jean won't feel the best for you, so you probably would think Jean's like A tier for you guys, but S tier right at the top of ranked. He's so good. Knockout Bounty, he's insane. Gem Grab meta, he's insane with the Vision gear and also the Mythic gear. You think of Brawl as well. He's got some good synergy with brawlers like Max, for example. He's more of a synergy brawler, but if you're a good Jean, you can make plays so easily, and there's just so many good things about him in the meta. Next up, we have Byron. So again, not many people understand Byron and how strong he is, but the damage buff is just way over the top. You can heal so much with Byron. You can do so much damage with a super, just main attack, and he synergizes with some of the most broken brawlers in the game right now, like Draco, Melody, any type of aggro with Max. It's just, he's so versatile. You can play him literally in every single scenario. The only time you probably don't want to play him is on super bushy maps, on Brawl. But other than that, you can get away with playing Byron. Now moving into the top 5, starting off with Max. So Max is just insane. Super versatile. You're not going to get like star player Max all of the time. You're not going to really finish positive and KD too much, but it's all about your support, building up your super really frequently, giving your teammates that are really good with speed, that speed boost, you know, like brawlers like Sandy, Rosa. There's just so many brawlers that are so good with the speed, and you want to abuse that as much as possible. Then you've got the Hypercharge on top of that, which is crazy broken. All 3 players can stand in the same spot and they can all gain 75% of your super. That is just crazy to me, with crazy speed as well. Max can even cycle to another Hypercharge super. That's how broken it is. Before we have Sandy, so I don't need to even speak about Sandy anymore. Sandy is just crazy broken right now. The Hypercharge is just insane. It lasts for 10 seconds, the speed boost. You get the mute on landing as well, and you cycle it before your second super, the Hypercharge. It's just crazy, and Sandy's so versatile. Your randoms won't know how to pinch Sandy, and even if you think you can pinch Sandy the whole game, it just takes for one mistake. Sandy will get in, charge super, and that's it. The super just gets all the control. It's one of the best supers in the game, and it's just so difficult to counter perfectly. Next up, we have Melody. So we'll say there are some counters to Melody out there in the meta, like Cordelius and some other like heavy tanks, but a good Melody will just rip through your team, especially in heist. You know, Melody's a good counter pick to a lot of snipers in Knockout and Bounty. Gem Grab, she can be pretty dangerous on non-bushy maps like Acute Angle. There's just always a use case for Melody. She's just so insane with the gadget and her damage with the notes. Next up in the S tier, we have Angelo. So he just barely misses out on the best brawler in the game. He's just insane right now. He's probably the brawler that I'm finding hardest to counter in the meta because he can just charge his main attack so quickly, 4.4k damage, and then he charges super in 2 hits, which just deals insane damage as well with the poison. He has a jump away gadget, as I probably mentioned, and there's just so many broken things about him. Do I even need to speak about him anymore? Everyone knows how strong Angelo is. And then lastly, we have Draco. So Draco is insanely underrated by the casuals. I can't believe people aren't seeing how strong Draco is right now. It's mainly because of the synergy you have with your last stand gadget and then your star power that heals you up as well. If you pop the gadget and then quickly go into super, you've got that 2-second window. You're just cheating death even faster. You also get a speed boost. You get a damage reduction as well. I think it's 25%. You get additional ammo when you get into super. You can just cycle through so quickly, and especially if you get some cheesy synergy with Byron, with Poco, with Kit, it's pretty much over for the enemies. Like, I'm literally facing triple counter and I've got like a Byron or a Kit on my team and I just win every single time. Of course, it's a bit stronger on knockout and bounty. Hot zone, he's absolutely broken on because he can just change so quickly. He's just insane, guys. You need to try it out more. Trust me, there's hardly any brawlers that fully shut down a Draco. Once you learn the right timing with the gadget, it's just over. He's just crazy strong. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Here's the tier list on the screen for you guys. Make sure to screenshot it and link my video if you've got to post it anywhere. Let me know whether I'm wrong on anything. Again, there will be a few outliers, but I think this is insanely accurate because, again, I played so much ranked. This is going to be a bit different to people below Masters, as I said, because there's modifiers, and it'll be a bit different to competitive tier lists because they're playing on a different map pool right now. So this is just purely Masters ranked and from what I've been playing. So yeah, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.